day job, and welcome again to the Environment for the Americas Bird Book Club. And again, my name is Alicia King, and I am joining you from Wisconsin. And as a volunteer for the Environment for the Americas, I love doing the Bird Book Club. My day job is as the executive director of the Wisconsin Society for Ornithology. So I love being able to do volunteer work in the birding world, and I love being able to work in the birding world. So tonight, I'm going to give a little overview about Environment for the Americas, and then I'm going to introduce Joan, who is our author guest this evening, and we're going to talk about the social lives of birds. And so I'm super excited about that. So again, feel free if you want to turn your cameras on. We'd love to see your faces. Just keep your mics muted so that we don't have background noise. And then as we go through this evening, if you want to put your questions or your thoughts or things in the chat, feel free to do that, and we'll moderate questions after I introduce Joan and get things started. So I'm going to do a little technical switching here to turn on my camera, and I'm always hoping everything works. And Elise is joining me this evening from Environment for the Americas. Elise is our background magic maker, and they're going to make sure everything goes well tonight. So again, welcome to the Environment for the Americas Bird Book Club. So I just want to give that little overview of Environment for the Americas. Our thing is protecting, connecting, and inspiring. And so Environment for the Americas is committed to connecting diverse people to nature and bird conservation. And we lead global partnerships focused on bird conservation and focused on protecting migratory species and their habitats across international borders. So we're going throughout the Americas, and then also some global work. So our programs nurture the next generation of conservationists through education, outreach, and creating meaningful opportunities for people to get engaged with conservation. So we do this in a variety of ways, but one of the signature things that we do is World Migratory Bird Day. And it's the cornerstone conservation campaign central to so many of the programs that we work on. This is an annual awareness raising initiative that highlights the need for conservation of migratory birds and their habitats. And it has a global reach and gives action and hopefully inspiration to conserve both birds and their habitats and their environments through that education, through public engagement, and the activities across these borders. So it really is a very cool way that we can get people engaged and involved and feeling good about their participation in the programs that we do. And this year's World Migratory Bird Day theme focuses on community science and its impact on bird conservation. And so the motto that we've developed for this year, the theme is "Every bird counts and your observations matter." So this theme is an opportunity for you to get engaged at a variety of levels. So World Migratory Bird Day 2026, every bird counts and your observations matter. And they really, really do. One of the other things that Environment for the Americas has is a really cool internship program. And these internship programs really empower underrepresented early career professionals. So we partner with the U.S. Forest Service, National Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Land Management, Audubon chapters, other organizations and agencies that have some kind of focus on birds. We offer that hands-on experience and mentorship, and we really want these internships to equip the next generation of conservationists with the skills and the connections that they need to begin their stewardship and their conservation careers. So incredibly important work being done now and into the future. So there are so many ways that you can support our work, and we appreciate you all being here tonight at the Bird Book Club. You can become a member easy to do by going to our website. You can donate. One of the ways you can donate is through a happy kit. And this allows us to put together a comprehensive education kit that contains all sorts of resources that educators in Latin America can use. And I did this the last year when I was in last October when I was in Colombia, and the teachers were so thankful for the resources that we were able to deliver to them. You can also donate toward binoculars. These get used by our interns and the projects and programs that they work on. You can donate airline miles, and this helps to allow our interns to be able to travel. And if you're going on a trip, you can deliver education supplies. So it's really fun to take an extra suitcase and be able to hand those out and deliver those to places that might otherwise have a hard time getting these materials. And then you can go shopping on the online store. I'm wearing a scarf that I got on the online store, and it's an excuse to go shopping. So many, many ways that you can support us. So one of the ways that you support us is coming to our Environment for the Bird Book Club and being able to share what you're learning with other people. So our Bird Book Club, second Thursday of the month, you can register for one or all of the sessions, and you can just go online, and Elise is putting all sorts of links in the chat so that you can easily find these materials. So I'm super excited about May's Bird Book Club because nighthawks just hold a real special place in my heart. When I was living in Indianapolis, Indiana, in Broderville Village, we had nighthawks that were roosting on a flat gravel-covered roof just off of the White River. And just being able to see them in the summertime and hear them and just kind of be a part of their lives was so special. So looking forward to seeing Gretchen Newberry in May. But tonight, I am super excited to have Joan Strassmann. She is an award-winning teacher of animal behavior. She was at Rice University in Houston and then Washington University in St. Louis. I lived in St. Louis for a short time. And she has written more than 200 scientific articles, and which just is amazing. If you've ever written a scientific article or ever read one, you know what a lot of work that is. She's also a member of the National Academy of Sciences and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and a fellow of the Animal Behavior Society and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And she has a Guggenheim Fellowship. She lives with her husband, sometimes in St. Louis, Missouri, and in Leland, Michigan. And so I am super excited, Joan, to have you joining us tonight. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. And again, welcome everybody. We are recording this. Please share with us where you've joined us from. And as we go through this evening, if you have thoughts or questions, put them in the chat and we'll get to them a little bit later. But right now, Joan, welcome. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, thank you. It's really an honor to be here to spend this evening with everybody. I guess I'll talk a little bit about kind of the horrific task of actually writing a book. I can hardly believe I did it. Um, anyway, so I have a few slides that I'd like to share with you. Let's see if I can get this to work. Is that good? Did that work? Yeah.
Beautiful. I can see your first slide.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, this is actually my third book, although the journal is sort of a small book. Um, it's hard not to love birds, even annoying ones. It just can be really wonderful to see them. And then if you go somewhere a little farther away, as I did in January before facing 4 months of teaching in St. Louis and having to endure all of the cold weather, went down to Yucatan. So when I'm writing a book, I like to make it as personal as I can. I like to have seen the birds. I like to have known about the birds. Um, And I like to talk to people I know. So Emily Duval is one. She was actually an undergrad in my lab at Rice University. Most recently, she's been president of the Animal Behavior Society. She's a professor at Florida State. And she studies these lance-tailed manakins, which have a complicated male display where two males display to a female, but only one of them gets to mate with her. Another important thing about the book is the artist, Anthony Bartley. I'm really happy with his work, which the work he did for me is very different from what he does on his own. His website is there, Fading Royalty. So this book was really a passion project because I got my education entirely in the 1970s. And that was a time in animal behavior when we were just figuring out how important social behavior was and how important helping relatives was or getting something in it for yourself. It kind of supplanted the idea from before that animals worked for the good of the species or the group. Actually, they're quite selfish, but understanding what that really means was pretty complicated. So I'm just going to flick really quickly through a few of the topics. Start with flocks and these red shanks that form groups to avoid being carried away by sparrowhawks. Roosts can also offer protection, or in the case of the long-tailed tits, warmth. Um, Colonies are where they actually nest in groups, and this is common in lots of birds and quite spectacular, and particularly along the coasts. So just see tons of birds nesting in groups, and everyone's favorite, of course, the penguins, which have their place in the book. What's going on? Then there's the leks that I just mentioned that Emily studied. Other kinds of leks, the sage grouse on the Wyoming prairies. And there's even leks of ruffs, which have genetic determination. Another shout out for Anthony. There's families, starting with the simplest mom and dad and the kids. And the big surprise I talk about in the books is they may look like they're really dedicated and faithful and work very hard together. Actually, in most birds, they're philandering around as much as possible, each of them. So the male may not be caring for his own young. There's some birds like the Florida scrub jays that have helpers at the nest where older birds will stick around with their parents and raise the next young. And there's even communal breeders like these greater anis where multiple pairs lay eggs in the nest. Same with these pukekos or these Taiwan euhinas. So that's just sort of a quick overview of the kinds of things that this book talks about. And so maybe we can just end the slideshow there and turn it over to questions.
Thank you so much, Joan. So I did enjoy reading this book a lot, and I've done little dabblings of research projects and reading lots of books and papers and one of the things that is real easy for me to do is geek out on this kind of stuff. And I noticed that you had a lot of credits to folks in your book. And one of the things that I wanted to, and for those of you that join us on a regular basis, you know how I go through and, find all the little things that I want to talk about. So as you are joining us this evening and thinking about things, do please do put it in the chat. But I just wanted to point out, Joan, that um, that you had somebody that helped you not be too sciencey or too geeky about some of this stuff. And as I was reading it, I appreciated that because while I can geek out about it, it's nice to have a more layman's explanation of some of the things that were happening in the research that you did and the things that you added to your book. And one of the things that I was thinking about was it takes a village, and it takes a village. And while that village may not be perfect, it really does work in those situations. So we do have a question from Laura. Laura is Peruvian. She lives in Cleveland, Ohio, and she's asking, do mannequin males always display in pairs, and are they related?
So there's lots of species of mannequins, and the species which I talk about in the book is the lance-tailed mannequin. And lance-tailed mannequins do always display in pairs, but that's not true of all mannequins. There's all kinds of different ways that other mannequins display. And interestingly, those two males are not related. And if you remove the alpha male, the subordinate one does not usually take over. Someone else will, but he does have a higher chance overall of taking over somewhere and eventually becoming an alpha. And I love Peru. My son-in-law is Peruvian, so we do go to Peru a certain amount.
Excellent. Thanks for that question, Laura. And Joan, thanks for kind of clarifying that. And so one of the things that you mentioned, and that was throughout your book, and you mentioned it this evening, is the notion that a lot of people are like, oh, birds made for life. And but we've learned, and you've mentioned it in your book, how there's a little hanky panky going on, and there's other things happening. And I know one of the things that, as I'm looking at the wrens in my own backyard, the way that they'll build multiple nests, and so the female will choose a nest, and then putting the human take on it is like, well, I put all that energy into making a second nest. I'm going to see if I can find another sweetie to occupy that nest. So, can you talk a little bit about that habit that birds have? Are there some birds that are more notorious for doing that kind of thing, or did you find it just really prevalent among lots of birds?
Well, birds do lots of different things, and they don't all mess around. I mean, we found in a study in my own group of mockingbirds that they were remarkably true to their mates, and there was very little um, extra pair, we call it mating. So that was kind of surprising. Um, yeah, there have been studies where they've put out extra nest boxes in some males' territories and not others. And then those males with extra nest boxes are viewed as better by the females just because they seem to have these extra boxes. They don't realize, well, those boxes were just added by a researcher, nothing to do with the male. Um, I think. I mean, there's so many stories. One of them that really impressed me was the purple martins. So, purple martins almost always these days nest in our own constructed houses of various sorts. They're either, some have been studied in more natural houses, but they're basically in things we've built. The males come back before the females from their southern winter migration, and the older males come back before the younger males. So an older male will come, and it'll be those gourds or one of those little colonial houses, and he will pick a hole and have that be his nest. And then he will try to monopolize as many of the other possible nest holes as he can and not let other males of his same age class use them. And then a week or two later, the younger males come. And guess what? He lets them move in. And then later come the females. And a general truism is the females go for the older males. So he gets a mate quite quickly. And then later, the younger males also attract mates. And those females are very happy to mate in addition to their own mate with that older dominant male at the house. So he has this boarding house for birds, doesn't let other old guys in, lets the younger guys in. The females come, and then those younger males can't keep their female from philandering with the older guy. Just a crazy story.
So the social lives of birds are pretty amazing. And you've told some great stories in here about that. Um, and I want to get into some of the questions that I have, but um, Julia, I'm not sure I'm saying your name correctly, but she says, I loved reading about the ruffs and their genetic variations, especially the third type of males making up that 1%. Are there other birds that have similar genetic variations that are displayed phenotypically?
So, yes, so I'll just tell people that might not have read about the ruffs. This is a lekking bird. It's found in Europe. It was studied in the Netherlands. And the males have three different forms. They have the main form that's got a big black ruff. Then they have a satellite, which displays with that one and has a white ruff. And then there's another one called a fader, which looks just like the females, and that's the one that's only like 1%. And it turns out it's this huge chromosomal inversion where a piece of the chromosome got cut out and flipped around, and then it couldn't recombine during meiosis and all that. And so it happened with the fader first, and then the satellite was sort of a switching back, and there just happened to be some genes in that area important for behavior. So it's really kind of an amazing and crazy story how they figured all of this out. One of the guys who did most of the work was actually potato farmer who said that science was great for a hobby, but he wouldn't want to rely on it for a living. He would much rather rely on potatoes. So there are other birds with polymorphisms, and I haven't done a huge systematic study of them, but there's one that I talked about in my book, Slow Birding, which is the white-throated sparrow, which here in St. Louis, it's been here all winter. They're getting more and more common, which I think means they're flying up from the south and they're on their way north. And there's two genetic morphs, one that has a white eyebrow and one that has a tan. And it's a chromosomal inversion. Um, and in this case, so these birds are diploid just like we are and have paired chromosomes. If you have that inversion on both chromosomes, it's lethal. So, we do have in ourselves some lethal genes that are lethal if you have two copies, but okay if you have only one. So these white males or white-browed males also can have white-browed females, but the males are aggressive. They're not faithful to their females. They get big territories and they aren't good at fathers. The tan males, on the other hand, they're not as aggressive. They have smaller territories. They're faithful to their females and generally, the nice guy. But so a tan male is kind of the ancestral type. If a tan male mated with a tan female, he would be in danger of losing paternity to those aggressive white guys. But if he mates with a white female, white browed, it's a fairly subtle difference, but you can see it if you look for it. If he mates with the white one, he won't lose paternity because the white males can't mate with those females. So I like to describe it, and other people do this too, as really a situation where you have four sexes because you have male and you have female, but then a white male can only mate with a tan female, and a tan male can mate with either. But anyway, so that's another example. And there are others. There's white crowned sparrows have something similar, and I think we'll find more and more of these sorts of bizarre genetic situations.
Oh my gosh, it is bizarre, and it's amazing that you can hone in on that and discover those particular things, which is why it's so great to work with so many students and find the research that they're doing. I go on a regular for annual meetings for the American Ornithological Society. And I love seeing the students present their papers, and frequently, their papers like that. And I love that you work with students to be able to get some of the materials that you've used for your book. So let's see, we have a question from Nancy. In chapter 7, she's asking about mate choice and parental care. And she says, I found this interesting in how the hormone change of the egg and how long has it taken for the greater understanding of mate choice, both by the males and females? And I'm hoping, Nancy, that I captured what you wrote. Yeah.
So that's a big chapter on mate choice generally. And I'm not, did you have a specific bird in mind?
And Nancy, feel free to
I
turn on
was
your, yeah.
I was just amazed, how long people have been studying these birds. And in this chapter, you covered a lot of material. And so I'm thinking, how long did it take for all these parts to come together? As you were doing this research, did anyone, or did you find like there was where they were really starting to figure out that, well, like the four sexes, how, you know, humans haven't even accepted this yet, but we've got birds that have been around a lot longer than us, and they've got it figured out. So, what did it take for science to come up with, all the different research patterns that have been going on?
Yeah, people have studied birds for a long time, and yeah, different stories have taken different amounts of time. I mean, I think it's really fascinating that it seems like the first fossil evidence of parental care in birds is actually a male hovering over a nest of eggs. And the researchers figured out that it was a male. It's not easy with a fossil, after all. Birds don't even have intromittent organs, let alone intromittent organs with bones that might fossilize. But so the way they figured it out was that birds they have hollow bones. I mean, they've given up everything for flight, as I think anyone that studies them might know. And there's this stuff inside the bones that is sort of a place where resources are stored. So females will lose that as they lay eggs. And so they figured out from the structure of the bones that it was males over the eggs and not females. And it was also way more eggs than any female could lay. Yeah, so in that story, it's just kind of cool that they're sort of like the Rias of Argentina, where the males take care of the babies. Um, so another cool thing in that chapter might be the blue eggs that males decide. So birds are not like fans of the prodigal son or helping the ones that's struggling. You have to remember that a given bird that's made it to adulthood may nest a year or two or three, each time laying 3 to 8, depends on the species, eggs. And if two of those make it, it's doing well. So birds are generally looking not to bring the weakest baby along, but just to try to find any baby that might survive and put all their efforts towards that one. And so this was a study on robins where what they found, and actually this was done by a friend of mine, Bob Montgomery, he's Canadian. He's a real skeptic. He writes a monthly blog in the journal Ibis, and it's free to access. I really like it. Um, so he, so people had been saying that bluer eggs had more of this bilirubin, and it meant that the female was stronger and that males might be more likely to invest in them. And so what he did was he found a whole bunch of robins, took all of their eggs into incubators, put in half the nests dark blue eggs and in the other half light blue eggs, waited till the eggs were about to hatch, and then so they experienced these other colors, they incubated them, and then put the real eggs back and they hatched and all. And then he looked at how much the males cared for the babies. And he found that the males whose nests had darker blue eggs fed the babies twice as much for their first critical 3 days of life. So he's like, oh, these are good babies. Maybe they'll make it. I'll work extra hard. Um, yeah, there's lots of stories in that chapter.
The whole survival thing of birds is absolutely amazing. And if they survive in that first year, it's absolutely amazing because there are so many hazards that birds face, not only in their migratory paths and with their habitat, and then raising their young and all of the hazards and things that they could possibly experience. You talk in your book about pros and cons to some of the things that you've researched and some of the things that you've included. And as I was looking at this, I was thinking about birds that are in colonies, raising their young in colonies, and back to the thought of it takes a village. You say that 1/5 of all bird species nest in colonies. And so what's the pros and cons for that kind of nesting arrangement? So are they um, are they more likely to be successful when they're in a colony, or are there things that are issues when they're in a colony?
Yeah, so colonies are really interesting, and it's really interesting that so many nest in colonies. All of the seabirds nest in colonies. All of the birds that you find along the cliffs and islands and stuff along the ocean, they're all colonial. And there's a number of different possible reasons for it. Sort of the one that was really touted as I was coming up as an undergrad was protection from predators, and that if you were in a colony, especially if you were in the center of the colony, predators would be less likely to get you. And that went along with what my undergrad advisor called the universal costs to being in a colony, which is increased competition for food, increased transmission of parasites and diseases, and also increased chance of mate infidelities. Well, it turns out mate infidelities is kind of what they all do. Um, but so there's also environmental things. So with the um, birds that nest along the coasts, for example, in Norway, it was found that the biggest colonies were in areas where the currents came close to the shore that were carrying all of the little tiny krill and stuff like that that then the fish fed on. So uh, the ocean may be the largest larder out there for food, and no bird has figured out how to nest right on the water. So it's no surprise that the shores are so packed with birds. But even so, it's hard to get food, and most seabirds just have one egg at a time, and they can go off uh, for a long time. Yeah.
So, Joan, in your book and in that chapter where you talk about communal roosts, you mention, and I'm trying to kind of make sure I get this right. I'm a little distracted by the birds that are outside my window. So a bunch of sandhill cranes just flew by, and then a whole bunch of geese just flew by. Okay, so around page 32-ish in your chapter on communal roost, which is chapter 2, you I found it interesting that some flocks have dominant species on the outside of the way birds flock. And are they like protectors of the flock? So you would think that and you talk a little bit about this, that the birds on the inside are the safest, or the birds that are the most protected. But in some cases, the dominant birds on the outside of the flock, are they like protectors of the communal area?
So this is for a really specific kind of roost, which is one of families. And so I had that picture of the tits. It's actually on the cover of the book. And actually, these are long-tailed tits. They do not have the dominant ones on the edges, but there's a bird in it's in Australia, and it's called, I think, the varied Sitella. Yeah. And those guys are nesting in families. And so the bookends are the dominant male and another male, and their babies are in the middle, and they're both keeping them safe, but also keeping them warm. And so yeah, it really, you're not going to want to be on the outside in general. You're going to show that selfish urge to be in the middle. Yeah.
And it is kind of a survival thing.
Yeah.
So we have a question, and then Monique, who joins us on a regular basis, she says sandhill crane mating is a sight, and it really is. And I do have a question about dancing birds. Let's go to Julia. She appreciates the story you share about European white researchers misunderstanding the role of the paparia bird in South America. Can you speak more to those cultural gaps that may have impacted research?
Um, Yeah, that was kind of an interesting story. So there's this was on the chapter on mixed species flocks, and yeah, it was a really famous researcher, Bateman, I think, who was studying them, and he said that these mixed species flocks would be two pairs of several different birds who would go together as a group, and sort of they would forage in different places and they'd hang out together because the ones picking under bark that may not have their heads up would pay attention to the alarm calls of the flycatchers and stuff. So they'd all gain, and the flycatchers might even give a false warning call so they could steal from someone else. But so it was it it was Bateson, that's who it was. Anyway, so what he said was that he asked the locals what kind of bird it was that was sort of the leader, which had this name that Papayuda that they gave to them, and that then when he asked again, they brought a different species of bird. So he then said some rather negative things about the indigenous people, which, anybody that's spent any time with indigenous people and nature would know that they know what they're talking about. And so I figured there was multiple species that served in this role, and that is what's really going on. And sometimes language gets in the way. Uh, in my first book, Slow Birding, I talk about the blue form of the snow goose and how there was this white Canadian that made it his life's mission to discover their breeding ground. Well, discovering their breeding ground simply meant meeting up with the appropriate group of indigenous people in the far north, and they knew exactly where these birds breed. So, uh, anytime you look into history on just about any topic, you're going to run into this sort of thing. Yeah, so I'm no expert on it, but yeah, yeah.
Well, then, I know that as Environment for the Americas and other organizations do work in other countries and in particularly in Central and South America, and all of my trips down there, we really depend on local guides and local people to show us where the birds are. And they know intimately where to find whatever it is that we're looking for. They're not necessarily the paid guides or the guides that, that are researchers or university students. They live there in that world, and they have amazing stories about the things that happen. And I know that I've been with groups before, and and been with some of those professors that are like, oh, well, I don't think that's the case. And then we go down there, and sure enough, the locals have shared things with us that the books didn't share with us or didn't get capture that way. So you're so right, Joan. The people who have been there for years previously, or that live there and are not the bird geeks or the bird researchers, know so much about the bird habits and the stories to share. And that's one of the things, Joan, that you do a nice job of in this book is your storytelling, the way that you share what you've researched and what you've discovered and how you've discovered it. And one of the things I want to go to, just, as we're thinking about the way that birds live and their lives, you have, oh, I just lost my page. You talk a little bit about, the flocking of birds, and that, I mean, it's survival. These birds are surviving, but you talk about plant eaters flocking more. And I wonder if there's more to that story, like those plant eating birds. And then, and another place, and I'm just trying to think what chapter that was in, or if it's in the same area, you were talking about the habitat and that birds in flocks use different parts of the habitat. So they may be flocking together, but they're using different places within that same flocking area. I don't know if I'm describing that very well, but can you talk a little bit more about that, plant eaters flocking more and then the use of the habitats?
So the flock eaters flocking more. There's this really interesting Canadian guy named, oh geez, what's his name? Is it Beauchamp? And he's actually done statistics for a veterinary school. He's retired now, and he's done a bunch of what we call these meta-analyses, where he's just taken all the data he can find from hundreds of species of birds and then asked the question, are plant eaters more flocking than non-plant eaters, and finding a pattern. So that's going to be a general thing. It's not going to be true for the seabirds because they're colonial, but they're exclusively meat eaters. Um, there's birds like the red-winged blackbirds and the granivorous birds. The one bird I talk about from South Africa in the what is that in the I guess in the very last chapter, the sociable weavers. So you might imagine that often seeds in particular are simply going to be abundant in huger quantities often than meat. And so he found this overall pattern. And so that's what I mentioned there. Yeah.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. So one of the things I was thinking about for seed eaters, when you were talking about that flocking and how, the percentageness of those flocking birds, um, and I do want to get back to the habitat thing, but so when we think about chickadees and just the whole survival thing, chickadees are known to go into a feeder, for example, and choose the heaviest seed. And so there was research years ago that actually was presented at what used to be, well, the American Ornithological Society, but it used to be called AOU. And so the student, was studying the habits of chickadees, and they're one of the birds that you talk about being mixed flocking, or in those mixed flocks. But chickadees will go in and pick up seeds and then choose the heaviest one because the thought is they fly off with it, and if they're going to fly off, spend that energy picking out a seed, they want to get the heavier seed, so it's more worth their trip. So I would imagine that the flocking, and especially the mixed flocking, allows them to be a little more safe when they go in there and pick the seed. Is that something that you've heard in your research, or?
Chickadees are so interesting. I go to Michigan every summer to Leland, and my desk looks right out on my feeders. A chickadee will never take two seeds. It'll take one seed, it'll fly off to the pine tree or the willow, and it will either cache it or open it and eat it. Uh, a cardinal will just sit there on the feeder and eat and eat and eat. And yeah, birds are so different, and I don't know, there's a lot of people that study something they call the landscape of fear, and that is simply way stronger for a tiny chickadee than it is for a larger cardinal. But then you have to realize that chickadees are almost too small for a Cooper's hawk to bother with. And it's those cardinals that are just the right size for a Cooper's hawk. So yeah, yeah, it can be challenging.
Talk about meat eating birds.
Yes.
So You did talk a little bit about the different habitats, or like, a flock will come in and use different parts of the habitat. Is there more to that research, or that is there more reason to some of that? Is it
Uh,
just availability of the food, or their ability to see if there's potential danger, or
I mean, there'll be, I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to. I can say that within a flock, like with the red-winged blackbirds, uh, the best spot to be is towards the top. Say they're roosting in cattails towards the top, but then if a predator comes, they'll go down, and the lower ones that are getting safety down there have to experience something that was a new term for me that the researchers used, which was fecal rain, which sounded pretty terrible. But so I think they'll use different parts of within a group, they will use different areas, and the center is generally the safer area, and birds will forage in different areas. So the brown creepers are under the bark, as are the chickadees, whereas the flycatchers will be up and fly catching. Uh, Not sure that answered what you were asking.
yeah, no, I think that that's that is something. And I was looking for my notes, just because they're all over the place, and I'm trying to find exactly where that question was, but I am not finding it easily at the tip of my finger. But I do you do talk, and you've mentioned this evening, that risk factor for the birds that we love. And Julia has another question. Are there interesting ways that birds work together to defend themselves as we think about risk? And Monique is also asking, and you can probably combine the answer to these questions: is safety in numbers equal less food for foraging?
Yeah, so I'll take those in turn. And so yes, Julia mentioned the fecal rain. Uh, and there's a really cool story about field fairs in Europe. So this is a robin, it's a thrush, it's like robins sort of, and they nest um, in the early spring when there's no leaves on the trees, they will nest in groups. And then if their nest is destroyed or something and the trees leaf out, then they will no longer nest in groups. When they nest in groups, if a predator comes and gets one nest, they might get them all. So the birds will surround the predator, the bird, and projectile poop on it, onto its feathers, using its poop as a weapon, using their poop as a weapon. And of course, birds can't have stuff on their feathers or they can't fly. So it's a very effective defense. And there's warning calls, there's mobbing. I don't know if you've had a poor owl trying to roost in a pine tree at your house, and then the little birds just will not let it alone. So there's lots of group things like that. Now, as far as the trade-off between groups and food, that's been best studied in things like shorebirds, where you can watch pecking rates and things like that. And yeah, it's definitely true that if you are in a bigger group, it is going to be harder to get food. So there's definitely a trade-off there. And it's really true that the whole life of a bird is from minute to minute, it's one big trade-off. I suppose not so different from our lives, where we're like, okay, what do I do now? I have five things that must be done.
the pros and the cons. It's like, okay. Oh my gosh. So this has been fascinating, and the book is fascinating. If you have not yet read it, I encourage you to go to your local bookstore, find a copy. And if you're like me, I just found these fascinating, and it just opens up the whole world of all of the things that you can think about as you're out there bird watching. So you have lots of kudos in the chat, and I've had some personally sent to me, and how much the folks have enjoyed this book. So thank you, Joan, so much for joining us. And do you have another book that you're planning on writing?
I do. I do. Um, I'm interested in food, and so my daughter tells me I can't use this title, so I'll tell you what it is, and you can tell me if I should not use it. It's going to be about all the ways that birds get food and what they do, and trade-offs in food and everything. So my tentative title was Eating Like a Bird, and my daughter says I can't use it, so I don't know. What do you
Oh,
think?
I love it. Okay, you all have little reactions down at the bottom of your screen. If you're I love it camp, go ahead and give us a little heart or a
You
little
really don't
thumbs
have
up.
to be. She says it could be triggering for some people. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So so yeah.
All right. I've got lots of I like it, I like it, I love it.
Anyway, I'm also trying to learn to write a little bit less like a boring old scientist. So I'm trying to learn to make it just a little bit more fun, maybe a little bit less technical. I mean, I did have people with this book, they were like, "Oh, John, you can't talk about that." I'm like, "Oh, it's such a cool story." No, it really isn't. So anyway, I think I probably needed even a little bit more of that. So I
Oh, fun,
always got
fun.
stuff to learn, which makes it fun.
Well, I love that you have an acknowledgement for the person that did help you keep it a little less technical, and I think you did a pretty good job of blending the technical with the fun stuff. So I know
Thank
I enjoyed it. The Social Lives of Birds. Thank you again, Joan, for joining us on the Environment for the Americas Bird Book Club, and thank you all for joining us this evening, taking time out of your busy schedule. And we will see you next month, where we are going to talk about birds that go bump in the night.